Between Ant-Man getting a movie trilogy, Morbius the Living Vampire becoming an ironic internet sensation, and Moon Knight fumbling the ball, we as audiences have become a little desensitized to big-budget summer blockbuster movies about relatively obscure Marvel characters. But there was a time when something like this was so much more surprising and delightful. During the mid-2000s, superhero movies were finally finding their footing with the use of photorealistic VFX, finally being able to render these characters in a believable way. Usually these huge budgets, big-name actors, and high-quality special effects were saved for characters your grandma's probably heard of, like X-Men, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Fantastic Four, the Hulk, and characters that were at least kind of recognizable, like Daredevil, Iron Man, or the Punisher. Blade is a weird happy accident. But one character in particular always felt like a strange one to get a movie in the same year as Dancing Man 3 and The Rise of Galactus Cloud. Now, a word from our sponsor. In 2020, there were over 5 million car crashes. That's more than 15,000 a day and 600 an hour. Just back in December, my own dad slid off an icy road and broke his hip in 4 places, and the thought of getting legal help was so daunting for him. Those in an accident can be entitled to more than you think. When something like that happens, it's always good to have someone in your corner looking out for your best interest. Someone like the fine folks at Morgan & Morgan. If you've been in an accident, there are certain things you need to do. Make sure you're okay, make sure you get a police report, make sure you contact your insurance. So if you're injured and don't know where to start, with Morgan & Morgan it's so easy. Morgan & Morgan have modernized injury law by making the process as easy and streamlined as possible, so you can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less. No need for you to visit law offices and sit through timely consultations. You can submit a claim and have a lawyer review your case and get started on helping you right away. You can submit your case details, sign contracts, upload documents, and medical records all from your cell phone. And you can even text your attorney and legal team throughout the duration of your case. With Morgan & Morgan, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave the couch. If you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. For more information, go to forthepeople.com or pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. Now back to the video. A character I was convinced only hardcore comic fans knew about, or like bikers that had tattoos of him, maybe people who grew up with his few minor appearances in 90s superhero cartoons. I knew about him because my dad told me about the character and I had a few Ghost Rider action figures, so seeing him on the big screen when I was like 7 years old was the coolest shit ever. And this movie came out as early as it possibly could have in the lineage of comic book films. You really couldn't do this character in live action before the advent of CGI motion tracking. Imagine this movie in the 80s. He'd be like a guy in a mask with his head on fire, and it just wouldn't evoke the same visceral feeling of seeing this character design and going, "Whoa, that's awesome!" That all being said, these movies are sort of strange anomalies looking back now, and almost feel like 2 separate, unrelated attempts to adapt the same character that incidentally shared a leading man in Nick Cage as the star. There's a lot of bizarrely different creative decisions between the two of these that I feel are worth examining, if only because they were such experimental movies in this genre that can now feel a little bit formulaic. Let's dive into what made the 2 Ghost Rider movies so strange and yet so interesting, and try to figure out why a potential big contender in the world of comic book movies didn't quite make it to a full trilogy. It wouldn't be the 2000s without some grit and some edge. So I've turned to the guy that most likely got our Marvel anime video flagged as too adult by talking about boobs for 3 solid minutes. The Danny Ketch to my Johnny Blaze, the Zarathos in my motorcycle, my boy, the one and only Muzzy!
The spirits of the dead shall return for as long as my gray matter continues to stir, and the souls of the so-called...
Hey, what can I say? You put a skull guy in all black leather without it irritating my nethers, and put some spikes and a chain on him? I'm gonna say that's pretty cool. I can't remember if this first movie is what introduced me to the character or not, but he is one that's always caught my interest, with his ongoing legacy and cool crossovers like the original Midnight Suns. I still haven't gotten into most of his solo outing stuff beyond initial appearances and stuff to catch up on books I was more interested in. So it's weird that this movie has stayed with me for so long. Probably because I got it on bootleg! Look at this hoe!
Ghost Rider is the story of a motorcycle stuntman who made a deal with a high-ranking demon that's not actually the devil, but he likes people to think he's the devil even though that's a separate character. Insert joke about Spider-Man being ruined forever here. Johnny Blaze's father and mentor comes down with a case of Star-Lord's mom disease, and a mysterious stranger offers him a cure in exchange for his signature and blood and his immortal soul. The Big C is cured only for the Big G to take his life instead, that being gravity. Then this normal-looking dude in his 20s somehow goes so crazy with grief and isolation that he grows up to be Nicholas, I name myself after
Luke Cage from Marvel Comics.
10 years later. Once Spider-Man's Lord and Savior has his place in hell threatened by his asshole son Blackheart, Blaze is called into action to be the coolest goddamn character design ever and pass righteous judgment on evildoers. Considering this is the same director as the first Daredevil movie, this is a pretty slick movie. It's not stylish in a cringy, overly 2000s way like Daredevil was. It's just got a really nice feeling of energy and a solid pacing that keeps it interesting.
The style is more immersive than it is obnoxious. Whereas it was desperate to fit in the time of the early era of the genre with the best soundtrack ever that totally doesn't collide with its tone and character, and a surprising allergy to spandex to rival the X movies, it feels natural to the scenes being more of a spectacle than aspiring to be one out of compensation. It doesn't really trust you as an audience member though, being kind of reliant on flashbacks and reminders, but other than that, the presentation works in its favor.
The effects are incredibly well implemented, and I love the look of Ghost Rider's Hell powers, where he touches stuff and they become a cooler heavy metal version.
The transformation's only 4 shots with the same setup, yet they're all ingrained into my skull! It's so cool, man. And all the sound design involving the rider stands out. From his roars to the mechanical sounds on his bike. That was also something that was a big contrast to DD, cause god that movie's sound design is poopy butt. His voice almost reminds me of his voice in the 90s animated shows.
Richard Grieco?
Oh, I just want to do a Greco thing. I'm vibing with it.
He also voiced him in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, so that's cool.
Plus the movie's got a very well-balanced tone. You'd expect Ghost Rider to warrant an R rating and darker tone, but this works as a PG-13. It's just violent enough to get the point across without being over the top or feeling totally toothless either. Though I do wish they committed to doing more comic booky designs with characters other than Ghost Rider. Blackheart has such a cool look in the comics, and the movie committed to making Jim just a pale guy.
Oh, but don't forget, sometimes when he gets real mad and serious, his demon face comes out, and then when he absorbs all the souls, it's permanent, until he gets bitched at the end. They knew they couldn't live up to his Marvel vs. Capcom 2 art. I respect them for that. Man, now I just want to play Marvel vs. Capcom.
Mephisto straddles the line of looking badass and ridiculous, but they didn't attempt that either. He's just some old guy in a black trench coat. He looks like he's going to invite you to fuck his wife that's 30 years younger than him for $10,000 while he's going to a country club meeting in a different city. He doesn't even want to stay and watch.
That's oddly specific.
Sign the contract, Muzzy. Sign it, virile young man. And Blackheart's goons are just like dirty dudes with bad tudes.
Is Wallow cool but rude?
What the hell?
And is Abagor a party dude?
Oh, okay, I get it now.
Their stupid names were hard to fit into the flow of the theme, I tried.
I guess they're fine as just random boss encounters for Ghost Rider to quickly kill. I do like that they each have their own gimmick and he has to fight them in a different way each time, so it shows that he's adaptable. Then again, Ghost Rider is also just ridiculously overpowered in general. Johnny's character has a surprising bit of depth, too, where he's lived in regret over his deal with Kit Fisto for so many years that he's become bizarrely straight-edged to the point of seeming a little bit childish.
From the horse's mouth, it's Johnny actively staying away from any potential of sin entirely now that he's directly tied to it. But because of his dated and niche intake of media that portrays him as an old soul, I like to see it as him taking his time with the things he's found to enjoy in life, now that he knows it can't catch up to him as fast. He sees the trivialization of his skill in the motor world as entertainment and just that, mostly doing it probably for the love of it and for his own personal pride more than anyone else's, considering he doesn't really have to take the risk seriously with this whole situation.
He's got this youthful and innocent air about him despite his age and history. He's surprisingly likable and charming as our main character.
Nicolas Cage seemed to have a lot of input on how his character was portrayed and added a lot of subtle nuance to him, seeing that he's a big fan of the character.
Now, I know you're a huge fan of Ghost Rider. I mean, for our audience out there, on a scale of 1 to 10, how huge?
Well, 10, because I was always interested in the monsters when I was reading the comics. I like Ghost Rider and I like the Hulk.
Like the Rider being able to have a sense of humor while not just being a doofus and still looking sick as hell the whole time. Though the same can't be said for his longing lover waiting to throw up a bone. Ayo! Roxanne, played by Eva Longoria, aka Eva, I'ma put my long crevices of your pelvis, you pretty woman.
Muzz, that's an entirely different actress.
What the hell are you talking about, Scrawny?
You're thinking of Eva Longoria of Desperate Housewives. This is Eva Mendes of Too Fast, Too Furious fame.
I said forget about it, cuz.
She isn't a compelling love interest beyond just, well, being Eva Mendes. Yeah, I get it. Like, she's got the same thing as a lot of superhero girlfriends around this time, which is just being sad because she got stood up or getting kidnapped by the main villain. They could have given Eva Mendes, now you got me doing it.
Shit sucks, bud.
They could have given her more to do in the script, but the movie was already getting long anyway.
She's an established reporter, and she shot a gun. Twice!
I remember liking this movie a lot when it came out in 2007. My cousins and I actually snuck into another theater to watch a second showing that same day. Then I sort of stopped dwelling on it for a long time, and I fully expected to come back to it and think it's really stupid like a lot of stuff from my childhood. But this is really competently structured and executed in terms of adapting Ghost Rider. I'm infamous for not being huge on nostalgia, which causes me to clash with the comments on a lot of reviews. I'm a big proponent of just because you liked it when you were 7 doesn't mean it's actually good. But looking at this movie again with the eyes of an adult, it's alright. I feel like it was a first solid entry and it had so much potential from where it could go from here.
Some cool stuff included, a little bare bones, and by the books, but the genre was still finding its footing. Overall, entertaining.
But it seems like the movie didn't wow anyone enough to really warrant a strong demand for a direct sequel. The Ghost Rider series was shelved for 4 years, which at the time felt like 10 years because time moves slower when you're a toddler or whatever. By the time this sequel was finally made, a massive shift in focus took place because that was a crucial 4 years for this genre of movies. The Raimi Spider-Man trilogy ended, the MCU was finally on the rise, The Dark Knight was a massive success. That 4 years changed everything, and Ghost Rider needed a sequel to keep up with changing tides. Spirit of Vengeance didn't quite do that. Ghost Rider 2, Spirit of Massachusetts, is a very weird direct sequel. It almost feels like a complete reboot, but it retains the casting of Cage, which does imply it's a continuation. The tone and feel and style and look and everything is completely different. But it does have these odd little references and callbacks to the first movie that are subtle. Okay, I got it. This feels like the Old Man Logan Legacy sequel in a long series that's doing a send-off for the character after a bunch of other sequels and a long gap between the previous one. Except, this is the second one in the series. It's like we missed at least 4 movies in here to transition this.
Things in the story make sense to where Johnny ends up at the point we see him, but it still feels like such a way away from where the OG left off. Like, yeah, he was a wanted man for a period in the original, and that doesn't really get followed up on. But why is he isolated in a European abandoned warehouse as if he's Bruce Banner? Or even with the state of the Rider, he seemed like he embraced it by the end of the last one to the point of it not really being a thing he needed to control. But at the start of this, he's this hesitant beast that Johnny wants to hide away.
You'd think by virtue of them refilming the flashback to his deal with Mephisto, it's a full reboot, but I think it's an Evil Dead sort of thing where they didn't have the rights to the original movie's footage and it was easier to just film the recap a different way instead of paying out the ass to get the old thing, which wouldn't have matched anyway because they recast Mephisto. This new version of Mephisto looks like he'd run for president on a staunch anti-gay stance but secretly have a lover named Chuck.
Do you have some sort of, crusade against the guys playing him in these movies? I mean, what's going on? That's 2 in a row.
You can't stand in the way of their love, Muzzy!
There's even, what I think are small callbacks to the original outside of the deal flashback. Like him chugging this pitcher he did with the coffee pot in the first movie, which, when I was young, I thought it was just Johnny being Johnny. But it's actually because it's hot! He grabs it, fresh off the coffee maker, and starts gulping it down. Because it's hot! And he's got fire powers! You get it? Oh man, that shit is priceless. Or when he's doing tricks with Danny on his bike, he does the same move that he did on the freeway trying to get Roxanne's attention. That's pretty neat.
This This movie may feel like a drastic departure from the first one, but it's not without its interesting quirks. I love the bombastic, crazy editing style and the really intense camera work. The action is a real standout for this one, with a lot of practical stunts, crazy set pieces, and really memorable moments interspersed.
A lot of it, at least for me, comes in the mere presence of the rider. He's a lot of fun in the original, being badass and toying with his enemies in a goofy way a lot of the time. But here he's way more monstrous. Instead of playing with his enemies, he's like prepping for his prey in his first appearance here, intentionally scaring them, being a blur to them at times, in a way that I can see as being obnoxious in its presentation to some, but I feel it emphasizes him being this demonic supernatural entity. Aesthetically too, he's got a grimier look that I love here. He's more clean-cut in the original with his sleek leather and his shiny spikes, with his bike retaining the flame decals and molded demonic accessories. But here he's full-on charcoal, sporting a darker, meaner skull with a charred jacket that you can see the leather bubbling and even dripping at times, which is an amazing detail, along with his bike looking like it's come right out of an industrial oven. The sound design stays consistent too. His roars are lower pitched and less gargly, with this rippling, ghastly howl that follows behind whenever he appears. Weird thing though, indulge in this for a second. A parallel we found between these and the Venom movies of all things is that in the original installment the title characters' voices are more monstrous and unique to them, but then in its sequel will emphasize the actor's voice through said character. It's way more apparent in Venom than it is here, because it's very obviously more effective here, with him having more of an eerie whisper.
Sorry. Does it hurt? It looks like it does.
But still a weird connection. The contrast between the vibe of them is very jarring, and I do overall like him in the original more when it comes to how he's portrayed, but I think each version enhances their own specific style, feeling right in line with the vision of both. Though I say that hesitantly when it comes to the second.
It's just a shame that everything in between the action scenes sucks.
Dick.
Hey kids, you like Terminator 2? Well, here you go. We bounce from the coolest fight scenes you've ever seen to some of the most dull, lifeless, melodramatic shit with characters that I couldn't name two things about. Whenever his skull isn't on fire, this movie's in full autopilot. Though it does try to break the monotony with some bizarrely immature humor that it doesn't really commit hard enough to. Like seeing Johnny's naked butt flaps in animated form, a goon talking about his recurring testicular aches, and Ghost Rider pissing fire.
LOL, poop humor is what we call that in the industry.
When so many long stretches of the movie take itself so seriously, these feel really out of place. It's like they couldn't decide between being goofy schlock or trying to be a legitimate end-of-the-world story. The first movie had a much easier time balancing its tone.
It's weird when goofy is these guys' element. The first movie had melodramatic moments, but as a whole never felt like it took itself too seriously. Not to the point where it mocked its original source material and its concept, like most modern superhero movies conflate that stylistic technique with, but in a way it embraced the inherent silliness and allowed itself to have fun and be campy at times. But this one almost completely voids itself of any sort of owning it. You do get some crazy visuals, which I greatly appreciate, but they stand out like a sore thumb when it comes to the rest, which is so dark and gritty, it's almost dull, which is kind of ironic.
And then there's the fact that Johnny's personality has been pretty effectively stripped away here. You could almost argue it's because of the stress of being the Ghost Rider, but even then, the tortured soul stuff barely comes across.
The directors lean into more of his cageisms that he's infamous for, which they understandably were excited about.
The star of our movie is Nicolas Cage. When?
But it's not only wildly inconsistent from his character, it also strips him of being one.
He's more of an element in the plot than the main focus, because we have to spend so much time worrying about this dumb Antichrist John Connor kid, who has the map to dry land tattooed on his back and the immunity to the mushrooms. But this kid and Johnny don't bond nearly enough to care about him like those other characters.
Though it's not for lack of struggling to even try.
It's weird how nothing is really the central focus, actually. There's so many characters and so many things going on in this movie, and all of it feels like an afterthought somehow. Like it's all just randomly plugged in script elements to approximate the structure of a movie and move us from action scene to action scene. I've watched this movie like 6 times, and I sometimes forget that Idris Elba and the fucking Highlander are in it.
He's also Raiden.
Jinx!
What are you, Anna?
What are you, a Frozen fan?
Touche. It's shorter than the original, and the pacing is very fast, not just because of the many sped up shots throughout, but it's like, Johnny, we gotta go here, and I need you to do this, and then we gotta go here, and then I need you to do this, and then we gotta go here, and I need you to just like, do this.
What do you mean by that?
Off the back of him feeling like more of an element than a character, Johnny doesn't really have any stake in this whole situation outside of the exorcism of Zarthos, which surprisingly isn't mentioned in the original, with that being his origin and all the Carter Slade being his mentor stuff. Him getting so attached to Danny feels weird because he doesn't really have any significance to him in the plot outside of Moreau needing the rider to track him in order to save him. Plus, in the exorcism process, Johnny lets out that suppressed guilt of his actions with his father that guided him in the last movie with wanting to do good in order to make up for it.
I made the deal for me. I couldn't let him go. It was selfish.
Which is good and all, if his character wasn't so wildly inconsistent from the first up to the point in the exorcism.
As we looked at the behind-the-scenes content from this movie, its slapdash and breakneck nature started to make a lot more sense. Not just with the editing, but how quickly the story seems to want to go by. An interesting piece of information came up when it came to the screenwriting process. This was the first movie that the duo directed that they didn't write. That credit goes to Scott M. Gimple, Seth Hoffman, and David S. Goyer!
A Goyer project with Trumpet Production? Where have I heard that before?
Don't worry, it's not to that extent. This script was apparently done even before the original Ghost Rider movie. The directors described it as a hard R fusion of Lord of the Rings, The Da Vinci Code, The Grudge meets Mad Max, which all sounds terrible to me, but the studio called for rewrites to condense the ideas and elements of the original script to make it more focused and restrain themselves on the budget. This digging up and revising of the older script caused the production process to be super rushed. The directors were out of their element here, with the studio used to doing things a certain way and the duo doing things a totally different, unconventional way.
There's just moments where you can see them blatantly being sick of the shit they were having to deal with while working on this thing.
It was a rushed pre-pro schedule. It was so rushed that we ended up shooting in Romania, but we found out we were supposed to be shooting in Hungary.
A major part of their approach was trying to make this a globe-trotting adventure and shooting on location. That was a hassle of miscommunication when it comes to fees and permit limitations, or the major budget difference between the first film and this, or even the gear not being able to get to them when they needed it. Kinda sucks seeing it in retrospect. Like, there's even more that went wrong than that. It's just like a lot. Actually, do you want to cover all that?
Who, me?
Yeah, I mean, all that deep dive stuff seems more your speed, Mr. 58-minute video that's supposed to come out in January.
Man, shut the fuck up. Yeah, sure. Like, not now. It's kind of inconvenient to our time, but inevitably.
That means go subscribe and stay tuned, as he would put it.
Why are you saying it as if you have an automatic 45 caliber rifle pointed directly into the tight hole of your rectum?
I wouldn't on my life know what you're referring to, sir.
As a man whose life is guerrilla, let alone my style in short films made so far, movie making is a very difficult task that needs considerable time and preparation to be done efficiently.
And it sucks to see yet another soul taken away from a victim of the studio mandate. It's a shame that this series of films is characterized by being wildly inconsistent and then fizzling into obscurity. The Marvel Knights line of films could have been a nice adult-oriented alternative to the more summer blockbuster MCU fare. But the world wasn't quite ready for R-rated superheroes, and the only two movies that came out of that label were this and Punisher Warzone, which we talked about last month.
And, I guess the motion comics if you really want to get technical. With adopting most of its characters on screen now, Marvel Studios is put in a weird situation where they have to continue their stories in a way that were originally presented. Case in point, them continuing the Deadpool series of movies. Whether or not you like those movies,
I do!
They're a successful mainstream example of explicit content made in the superhero movie climate. And presumably, while Disney doesn't want to seem to fully commit to carrying over that element when it comes to other franchises with the same form of expression, they wouldn't be dumb enough to stop milking that cow, sucking from its udder and gulping down all the flowing juices that come with it. Why are my pants getting tight? So down the line, we potentially have room for them to venture out into different avenues for riskier characters that can't really even border that family-friendly mark. But until then, Ryan, I'll see you in your default settings acting range there.
The future of Ghost Rider in cinema is murky at the moment. Without showing his human form, we know Johnny Blaze's Ghost Rider appears in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to pass the skull torch to Robbie Reyes, which was cool as but they stopped using him in that show because you could see the budget burning in his head in every scene he was in. There's talk of a rumored Mephisto special on Disney Plus soon, but I fear it's been so long that he's become more of a Spider-Man villain and they may not even use Ghost Rider for that. We shall see. Either way, MCU Ghost Rider most likely won't be Nicolas Cage.
I don't need to be in the MCU. I'm Nick Cage.
Which, good for him, you know? That self-confidence is good. I scoff at the base responses to this clip. I'm not really on that train. I think he's more base for taking his stage name from
Luke Cage from Marvel Comics
and naming his kid after Superman, but it is what it is, you know?
In the end, Ghost Rider is a strange duology that feels like the trilogy that never was. It's pretty unusual for one of these things to sputter out at just 2. Usually your first movie bombs, or you go the distance and get that trilogy and everyone hates the third one. Amazing Spider-Man was special circumstances because that movie's success was going to make or break the whole cinematic universe it was in, but its budget was grossly inflated. Truly the Black Adam of its time. Ghost Rider, on the other hand, appeared in the transition stages of superhero movies and could have helped to usher us into the CBM renaissance.
No matter how much this thing needed it, thank God! I guess Mephisto, that it wasn't delayed into next year, cause it's probably not hard to imagine the blowback the duo would have experienced having their movie come out the same year as The Avengers, aka the film that every blockbuster franchise going onward wished to have in its catalog, but didn't have the backbone as a foundation to live off of, arguably including the same studio it came from. It would probably suck granny fucking slabby flapjacks, if I'm gonna be honest, for them to have to go through that.
Spirit of Vengeance felt like something that was too old hat by going for a dark, grounded, and realistic approach to something that should be balls-to-the-wall fun all the way through. It reminds me of the early 2000s superhero movies in all the bad ways instead of the good ways of its predecessor, showing restraint in the worst places. Everything with the writer himself goes insanely hard and is so cool and exciting, but nothing else in the movie strives for that. Ghost Rider is the most magical and crazy and exciting thing in his own movie, and he's surrounded by gray, dull, lifeless, grounded takes on his mythos. He should have been fighting 7-foot-tall red demon Mephisto or going to hell himself. A boring and uncreative story can't be saved by fun directing and whippy editing. The movie is like dry, flavorless meat getting doused in barbecue sauce. It's nice to have that initial kick, but, you know, under the spice, you're just eating cardboard. So while Thor was showing Asgard in all its glory, and Iron Man was battling big bad villains with powers that rival his own, and Captain America was chasing cosmic cubes all in, like, the span of a year from this movie's release, this ends up feeling quaint and unexciting. It's just Johnny Blaze without his powers for much of the runtime hanging out in the desert. It's not a small-scale or character-driven story, it has apocalyptic connotations and one of Marvel's biggest and most powerful villains, but it doesn't do anything with either of those. It's a road trip movie with barely any road trip. It's an end-of-the-world movie with no end of the world. And it's a Ghost Rider movie that barely cares about Ghost Rider himself when he's not on fire. The first movie did it right. That's a simple and small-scale story in the right way. Johnny's the big focus, and we like him, and he goes through a lot of changes in that movie. The plot is simple but effective. He's just rounding up a handful of dissidents from hell, and Blackheart wants a MacGuffin that'll let him dethrone Mephisto. They don't dangle Mephisto as the main antagonist and have him be a punk bitch that does nothing. The first movie inspired a lot of confidence that Flamehead could stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the biggest superheroes from Marvel. But instead, this sequel is so boneless that they got left behind.
Oh, I see what you did there.
I always get mad at YouTube for not putting my videos in the subscription box because people will comment, "Finally, Xavier uploads again after all these years," not knowing 3 other videos came out within the last month already. So maybe that stupid bell icon thing will help you remember I exist. If you want other ways to support the channel, you can always go hit up that Patreon for early videos and exclusive stuff because it's just $1. I'm not kidding, it's only $1. Isn't that cool? If everyone who watched this video donated $1 a month, I'd be able to afford a house for myself, so that would be really cool. You can also check out our merch on TeePublic, or just buy some of my random stuff on eBay. I have a pretty substantial collection of old toys that are still in the box in perfect condition, so go take a look in case you find something you like. And lastly, since this is a YouTube video and you probably play Fortnite, drop my creator code XavierGM next time you buy a silly dance or a cool character skin. Really helps me out. See you next time.